Welcome, Ben Fernandez, to the Sound Off. It is so awesome to have you in here.
No, thank you so much, Michelle, for having me.
Yeah, we're lucky we get you, on staff as part of the team. So to be able to just take time to have an in-depth conversation together is a real treat for me. And I know it's going to be for all of our listeners today.
I'm excited. Thank you.
So let me just embarrass you a little bit here. So bear with me while I provide a little context to our listeners and viewers about Ben. So Ben Fernandez is a trusted voice, many of you know, in school mental and behavioral health, crisis response, and student well-being. He's got an extensive, highly decorated, decades-long career in school psychology in some pretty big school districts, one of which we have in common. He brings a deep understanding of how to support students and staff before, during, and after emergencies. And at Safe and Sound, he helps us lead curriculum development and national conversations that challenge us to integrate mental and behavioral health into everything school safety. So it's really special to have you with us, Ben. We're going to get to more about you and all of your experience just through the conversation. But before we do that, I want you to share with the audience why today's conversation is so important in this little segment that we call the 60-second sound off. So, as we think about today's topic, and granted, guests may not know as if they're just tuning in, I want you to frame it for folks. How I guess as we think about like school safety, often, you and I see folks going for locks and mechanisms and tools and tech and drills and protocols and all of those really important, highly visible aspects of school safety. But at Safe and Sound and in your work, there's so much more to the story. So can you lay that out for us?
Absolutely. When we're thinking about comprehensive school safety, we really want to be thinking about the physical safety side and the psychological safety side. And I like to think about it as two sides of the same coin. You have to have one and another together. And it's very important that we are making sure our schools are safe and have the locks and have the protocols and practicing our drills. Yet at the same time, we need to make sure that we have that other half to it. From prevention, making sure that folks are being more resilient and learning coping strategies, all the way to the response piece, where we have many schools often experience a variety of crisis events, from accidental deaths to medical deaths, sometimes deaths by suicide, and other types of events. And that's where crisis intervention supports and services come into play, in that we are able to kind of assess what's going on and provide appropriate interventions to students so they can recover from these events and learn coping strategies, or if we need to connect them to more intensive kinds of services and supports outside of school, we're able to do that, as well as help the school get to a place where they're recovering also academically from this event, and returning to that safe and supportive school environment.
So I love how you framed, crisis support and intervention. I think we many times are looking for the quick fix in school safety. It's just it's human nature. What's the thing, right? And so I think getting us back to all of the very critical in between kind of work, and recognizing that there's a lot of the before to prepare for the during, and to prepare for the after. So thank you for framing that for us. So we're really looking at kind of the balance of physical and psychological safety, and the importance of a really well thought out crisis intervention, element to all things school safety. So definitely front burner, definitely critically important as you've laid it out, and we'll unpack that more in a minute. But I want to just kind of pivot for a second as we prepare to dive into some pretty in-depth content, and experiences with our listeners and our viewers. it's always helpful, to have our guest, kinda humanized, right? So you're a subject matter expert for us, but on the team, we have the benefit of knowing you as a real human being and a team member and a colleague and a friend, but some of these folks are just meeting you for the first time. So let's give them a little glimpse into Ben Fernandez here. Tell us something about yourself that maybe we wouldn't have guessed. What is something about
Hmm.
you that you consider kind of a superpower? It could be something, great or small, but something that makes you kind of unique and maybe even feeds your ability to do this incredible work in our schools and communities. What's your superpower, Ben?
Well, that's a great question. Um, Looking back at some of my work, particularly when I was leading a crisis intervention program in my previous district, um, I felt like probably my superpower will, I would like to think, and hopefully they would say the same thing, is that when things happened and bad things happened and we had to respond to them, I was not only encouraging but empowering the people, the team leads, the team members, the principals, the the counselors, the social workers, to respond and lead to that, lead that response. Because I feel like a lot of times when a crisis event occurs, everyone's just kind of in that, almost fight or flight kind of mode, and we get stuck. And we all have to wrap our heads around it. And I feel like I was able to do that successfully. And I would even say that, not only was I, empowering and encouraging to the teams that were responding and to the school, but I feel like to the administration above me that I had to report to, that I instilled that confidence, that empowerment for them to lead where they were at. So almost kind of I don't know, empowering folks to lead wherever they were. I think that would be something I might be my power. I don't know.
It is. It is. I'm just gonna second it. So I would say you bring the calm, you bring
Mm.
the confidence. I've seen you do it on our team. I've seen you interacting with some of our colleagues in moments of crisis when, they reach out. I'm thinking in particular of one day that when you and I were on a training and a colleague reached out from another state, SOS, like, what do I do about this? And there we were kind of in real time, solving for the issue. But in that moment too, you really kind of brought the calm. You helped center the situation and get everybody grounded on like we got this. We
Oh,
can do
that's
this.
good.
Yeah. I
Thank you.
I second that. I think that's a good one, and it is very relevant to today's conversation, as we talk about, the importance of supporting the crisis team. I'd love for you to just define for folks who maybe don't have a mental health background, who are we talking about here? Who even is the crisis team? What is a crisis team? I think some folks might be thinking more like emergency managers or public safety. We all use these terms, subject to our viewpoint from our professional silos, right? So, what are we talking about here? What is the crisis team? What is crisis intervention? Just give us the 101 so
Sure.
we can get started on the same page.
All right. So starting with what exactly is crisis intervention? Um, I think in the schools you'll hear that phrase kind of thrown around a lot,
Yeah.
and it fits in those certain contexts. But what I'm talking about are is it basically a response to an acute traumatic event, that has a fairly clear beginning and a fairly clear ending. It may be longer, maybe shorter, but either one, these events have the potential to significantly impact a student, a classroom, a grade level, a school community, to the point where they are struggling to cope with the situation, which then impacts their ability to function as a student, to have good social connection and relationships. It really it's the potential for trauma
Yeah.
with students. So that's the event and the kind of the process that we're talking about. The team generally are school mental health staff, school psychologists, school social workers, school counselors, school nurses, substance abuse specialists. Those are the folks that will tend to respond to those needs during a crisis event. And generally it depends on the school, the resources of the school, the size of the school, but generally what we see is a school based level team. Those are the folks that are assigned to that building, and depending on the nature of the incident, the level of response, it could simply be a school based team responding to that type of incident. However, if the nature of the response is such that it's a very significant impact to the school, then district level support in the form of district level crisis teams can come in to help support that school based team respond to that incident. So that's generally what it looks like. And from a incident command system perspective, that team falls within the operations section, so that there is a place for this group of
Yeah,
responders.
so, like, even if we're talking, even if you're looking at an like, an incident or a crisis, and we'll talk about some examples of those in a second, and you're kind of coming at this from a emergency management perspective, folks listening in today are thinking ICS, incident command structure, and yes, that there's this nexus there of how we're going to approach that and where this kind of mental health crisis intervention team fits within that structure. So that's a great way to kind of help folks see how these puzzle pieces essentially fit together.
Yeah,
What would you
100%. And I'd even add to that, looking at the emergency operations plans, there are annexes for this work.
right?
The public health, mental health annex is one area where you'll see crisis teams written in and operate from, as well as the recovery annex. So we are a part of the bigger response, the emergency operations plans. We're written in there, and
Yeah,
it should be.
literally.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what would be, some examples of various crises or incidents that involve this crisis team?
They can range from very small incidents where I've seen where it was a very popular parent who may have volunteered at the school, maybe dies in a car accident or cancer, something like that. Again, it's the level of response will vary given the characteristics of the school, but it can go up to suicide deaths, homicide deaths, significant serious injuries, in some cases, mass violence, terrorist attack kind of thing, and natural disasters. It's a range of types of incidents that schools can be impacted by,
Yeah.
and depending on where you are, some places may be prone to hurricanes, some may be prone to tornadoes. So these are things that crisis teams can assist with. But there are also a number of different threats and hazards that schools face that teams also can help support after they experience those types of events.
So as we think about those types of events, unfortunately, we're familiar, all of us, with all of those in all of our schools. So there are the types of, I would say, in maybe in scale and magnitude crises that are maybe a little bit smaller in or tighter is a better way to say in their impact. Maybe they're impacting a small group of folks who were connected with that teacher or that student at the center of the crisis. And then there are some very large scale things like natural disasters and mass violence. But as we look at where we are in time and space, what are some types of crises and crisis intervention strategies that our teams should be thinking about that maybe they're not, that maybe, we haven't been or they've been overlooked in the past. What are some that you kind of have concerns or wanna just kinda flag for our listeners, to keep, top of mind?
Well, I think one of the things I've seen not only in when I was in the schools, but also talking to colleagues who are leading programs and teams, I think there in general there has been kind of this shift in the emotional functioning of students. I think
Yeah.
at one time I feel like almost the baseline has shifted where there are a lot of students who may be struggling with a lot more mental health challenges than in the past, may be experiencing more trauma than they've had in the past. And so we have students who are not able to get treatment or maybe under treatment for a variety of things. So it's that emotional baseline I feel like has shifted. So I think when an acute event or a crisis event occurs, I think the impact could potentially be that much worse than we've experienced in the past. So I think crisis teams really need to be thinking about and taking a step back from what how you described, and that's something I always talk about as well: the before, during, and after. But before events occur, let's take a good hard look at what exactly is going on in our school, and then maybe drilling it down to a building. Are there certain things that are happening that have shifted this emotional baseline or this emotional acuity, I think they call it, one way or the other, and trying to get a sense of what are some of the unique specific needs for that school population, and start thinking about how are we going to respond if it happens at this school. And then also thinking about how we're going to effectively assess that impact, and then what interventions need to go in place. And then the next piece I would even say is, given that shift, we may have to be supporting these students a little bit longer than what we've had to do in the past. So I
Mhm.
think that's one big thing.
I mean, those are really good points because I think we hear pretty much on a daily basis that kiddos are not coming to school, with the same set of social competencies and skills, and they seem to be coming with a whole lot more baggage, if you will, right? There's just more, it seems to be more trauma impact. And we haven't, I think, identified as a society necessarily or as school communities, like, we haven't quite put our finger exactly on some of those variables that may be contributing there, and obviously that work continues, but in the meantime, we've got a different set our population and their needs, across the board in every single school community that we work with, we're hearing is different. So some of those interventions are going to need to be adjusted. Our approaches, the resources that we will need to support our students in times of crisis. It's a really, really good point. So to that point, what are some of the capabilities and competencies that our crisis teams, have got to be prioritizing, right? What are some of the skill sets that what have we gotta be doing to, better stock our tool belt essentially, to prepare and support during times of crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it starts with anchoring your team in an evidence informed, evidence based model of response. The prepare curriculum from NASP is one such model, and is common in the schools for school mental health, as well as big picture comprehensive school safety planning. I think starting with that, and then building your team. And once you build your team, I think it's vitally important to build that connection. And when I say team, I think it's important to remember. Yes, right now. We're talking about the mental health piece, and so obviously a lot of those folks are going to have that mental health training. But we have to remember and not forget that we're connected to a much bigger multidisciplinary
Yeah.
response and team. So making sure not only we're building those relationships and connections within that team, the crisis team, but also to, with your physical safety partners, with special ed, with all the players involved in comprehensive school safety. We're one team, which is connected to many, and so we got to make sure those relationships are established. Making sure that there are good response procedures, which include making sure that teams know when to take care of themselves, the self care piece. Because I always say that crisis team responders are superheroes. However, secondary trauma is a very, very real thing, and that's the kryptonite to us. And that will either kind of take us down very slowly or take us down very quickly. And so it's important that we recognize those needs. And then the other thing I would say is making sure we have the resources and materials to respond, as well as the leadership to respond. And for me, as I said earlier, I think it's important to establish kind of a chain of leadership from the very front line all the way up to the systems level, that you can lead and make decisions and respond to a crisis.
And for those of you who are listening and thinking, wow, Ben must come from like really big school districts, right? Like our little school district maybe doesn't have that capability. But gosh, working within a program like Prepare, Ben mentioned Prepare from the National Association of School Psychologists. It is like no other program I have seen out there for crisis teams. We're big supporters of Prepare at Safe and Sound, truly evidence-based, but really built around the multidisciplinary team. So, it just does such a beautiful job of preparing everybody for their role, kinda defining those lanes. So if you're listening and you're thinking, "Oh gosh, that sounds like a big school, arrangement," right? You can start, with a program that helps you organize the resources you do have, build that team that you do have, and then start building that connection all the way up to your leadership. And we did it in Newtown, right? Prepare is alive and well in Newtown now. I'm so grateful because it's such a difference maker. I only wish that we had had it there before our tragedy. So, as we think about that type of preparation and building that connectivity and support all the way up to district level leadership, it'd be great to have some examples. Ben, if you could maybe walk us through a case where maybe some of that recovery phase work, maybe rooted in Prepare, maybe just rooted in a well-oiled crisis team and good plans, could really help make a difference for a school experiencing crisis.
An example I think of was when I was new in the role of leading this crisis intervention program. I was brand new to the district, so I didn't know a whole lot. I came from one where I was for 20 some odd years. And in this new district, I didn't fully know all the resources and capabilities. But what ended up happening is at one of the schools, we had a student who was deaf who died. And at the time, I didn't. Well, I recognized right away that this is going to be a very different response, because it was a deaf student in a deaf program, in a deaf class. And so I knew I could not send the typical team to respond to this. Fortunately, I was made aware of that they had dedicated staff, psychologists, social workers, counselors, who are fluent in ASL at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. And we were able to rally them as a team to support. And what was interesting about that, there are a variety of challenges. However, one of the challenges and interesting things was that we had deaf students, deaf staff, and then a crisis team fluent in ASL, but we also had hearing staff, like the administration of that building, other teachers, other counselors, that were also part of that response. And so making sure, and I'll bring that part in a second, but making sure we had a team that could connect directly to those students was very important, and communicate with those students was very important, because then they were able to, triage the event. What was the impact, and how to best support and serve those students, um, which then helped in that immediate term, the immediate kind of shock of the news. But then as the longer term piece, the crisis team, they're all very close, and the crisis team stayed a little longer and continued to support, but also built deeper relationships with the students and the staff, and they also began to understand additional needs, that this population of students, it wasn't necessarily obvious to the rest. Within the deaf culture, there is a very unique culture with needs, concerns, and perspectives on safety, that we were able to learn, and we were able to provide support to, and eventually made changes to how we respond to not only deaf students, but really made us take a step back and say, okay, this is a good example of what we need to look at for other populations, maybe our not English speaking population, which we already had, things in place, but it really made us take another look at that. And then really had us take another look at what are we doing to help support individuals with special needs too. So not only did we support the recovery of our students, but ultimately in the longer term, in the longer run, we improved, in my opinion, the way we support our community, our school community, by understanding that there are these other variables that we need to be addressed when it comes to safety and recovery.
Wow, you're just automatically segueing to a topic that's near and dear to me, and I would love for you to weigh in a little bit for listeners on the reality of special populations in all of our schools. We are like so busy operating on the day to day, and things look like they're going great, and unfortunately, it is often crisis that
Mm.
exposes those little cracks and fissures and weaknesses, I suppose, in our regular kind of level of support. But all of our teams in some way are working with special populations, some more than others, as you share in this example. What are some really, I guess, concrete actions or shifts that you would advise for our teams, and team members listening, and school leaders listening, and multidisciplinary partners, who are listening in thinking. So, I mean, it's a beautiful example that you share about kind of that realization in real time while, supporting a crisis. What can we do to help our folks listening to really benefit from that hindsight as their foresight? How can they be thinking differently about special populations and their plans to improve safety planning?
Well, and it definitely goes back to looking at crisis response from the before, during, and after lens. I think there's so much we can do in the before. And to address your question specifically, I think it's really important for the school-based crisis team to really understand who is in their building, to understand what languages are spoken, to understand what disabilities, what needs are in the building. So starting there, but then I think the next step is making those connections, building those relationships, meeting those students, and if the opportunity presents itself, having a conversation about what is safety to you, and here's what we can offer. Are there any gaps? So kind of learning from them up front, but also understanding, okay, we have maybe a classroom that has real issues with emotional regulation. And if there's a crisis event, what if we have to respond here? What are some things we can do up front to help our response be that much better and more effective? And does that mean maybe coming in, ahead of time before crisis events? Now, obviously, we can't predict those, but maybe introducing maybe mini lessons of some psychoed ahead of time to talk about coping strategies, maybe growth mindset, helping them have a sense of control. I'm going to plug a couple of our programs. Staying safe is one. Looking at kind of some of the research coming out is a student's sense of control, or an individual's, I should say, sense of control, whether it's real control or even perceived control, can make a difference during a crisis event. The more control they feel, the better off. The less control they feel, the more impactful. It's not going to completely, shield them, but it will provide a buffer. And so I think if there are things we can do ahead of time, teaching skills, I think building those relationships up front, that social connection is such a powerful factor, protective factor, that in times of crisis, if you have students who have a variety of needs and they know who you are and they know they can go to you or you're coming to them to support, that's going to be very helpful. And at the same time, if the school-based team knows their population and a district level team has to come in that may not know the school population at all, that's when there's a lot of communication and teaching of, to the district level team of how to support. So I think there's a lot we can do ahead of time. And not only can we support our students, but we can support our families as well. How do we, talk with them, what resources they would need, those kind of things. So I think prepping up front, and then thinking about, okay, if we need to adjust how we deliver our interventions, that's good to know ahead of time instead of in the middle of a crisis event. And I think once we also know who is in our school, that'll help us actually, when an event occurs, help us actually triage the event, more effectively deliver interventions.
I love so many things you just said there. One of them, just I think about a great little nugget I learned from one of our other SMEs, our subject matter experts, Paul Tim, just talking about, like, don't forget, like, the gold in your staff. Do a staff survey,
Yep.
on a regular basis. Be reaching out to find out who speaks another language, who's fluent in ASL, who, is plugged into the various faith communities that some of our students, are part of, who's a coach, who knows CPR, who served in the military. Oh, people in our school staff are amazing, and the resources and connections that they bring on a daily basis are just huge. But in times of crisis, for the crisis
Mhm.
teams to know, really well, and be plugged in really well to them as resources is just amazing. So you also talked a lot about support. So all this supporting a student, supporting a family, supporting a staff member, supporting of the community. And you mentioned at some point in our conversation the fact that our kryptonite can be this
Mm.
kind of secondary trauma. And I know a lot of people listening today will connect with that because, like, your focus is on your people, your little people, their families, everyone around you, and you forget yourself. It's just a function of kind of moving through crisis, and yet you are absorbing, and there is a kind of, mental and psychological fatigue that we know it's a thing, but, it kind of creeps up, I would say, on people,
Mhm.
in times of supporting crisis. So that it's not our kryptonite, what can we do about that? How do we better prioritize, um, even just the recovery and the wellness of the practitioners, that are on that crisis team or supporting that crisis team? So how can our teams be thinking about their own resilience and their own ability to sustain during this work, especially knowing that this work tends to be longer in duration, given the needs of our students too?
Mhm. Yeah, it really starts with, I believe, the leadership, crisis team leadership, or even the systems level leadership, and establishing an atmosphere where it's okay to say, you know what? this response hits too close to home. I can't participate. And we were able to do that in both programs I supported, and there was no punishment, no foul, no nothing. There was no, we understood that, and if they wanted to completely kind of tag out, or if they wanted to do maybe more research as a part of the response, we were very flexible on that. So that's the foundational piece, I would say. And I think in establishing that atmosphere, it almost seemed like naturally the team members would be watching each other during a response and check in on each other. Not only they're supporting the students, but they're like, hey, you're in with the student for a while. How are you doing? Did you get some lunch? Do you need some water? Just really the basics, just checking in. And then, for me, I would have team leaders make sure that at the end of the day, check with their team before they go home, whether it's as a group, individually. I'd left it up to them depending on what happened. And then the team leaders would check on each other. For example, let's say my team was responding, and at the time I was leading crisis team number 2. Team leader number 1 would be calling me that night. How are you doing? How did everything go? What do you need for tomorrow? That kind of thing. The other thing is really, again, with that atmosphere, kind of remind, even though we are the ones that should know this, making sure we have our own care plans. Who are our, kind of trusted adults who, and, I would say inside school and outside of school, inside work, outside work, who are the people we're connecting with? And really reminding everyone of the basics, sleep, eating, exercise, social connection, and tailoring the plan to you to make sure it takes care of yourself. And, knowing when, maybe it has hit me too hard, and knowing when to, that you may need to get some, counseling support yourself, and how to get that through, the employee assistance program, or a therapist, really taking a look at that, and making sure you know where that clear line is. But I would say, those are kind of the key elements, but really making sure that teams and team leads and administration are making time for that, because it's so easy for us to forget that. And it's so very important, particularly in this work, that we are taking care. And I would even say not just the mental health crisis response, but all the safety work. Whether it's SROs, whether it's our teachers, administrators. If an event happens, we're all going to be impacted by it. So I would encourage that kind of, those kind of elements to the other groups as well.
That's gonna be one of my big takeaways from our conversation today. So whatever team you're on as part of our big team of school safety, be checking on each other, be holding each other accountable. We do that within our staff team, and sometimes it's a difficult conversation. We all get like really nose to the grindstone about things, and I just want to finish this. I recognize I'm a little burnt out, but I just want to see it to the end. And it's like, no, because that's not good for our team, right? And sometimes framing it that way has been helpful on our own team. Like if no, like you're so important to our team that we can't risk that. You absolutely have to step away now. This will be waiting for you, but like this is the health of our team. And I think that has been helpful for us. We are servant hearts just like every other team member that's joining here today, or in it for the mission, and so we lose sight of ourselves,
Yeah.
pretty regularly, and having that kind of accountability on your team is so important. I mean, you learn this from the military, learn this from our public safety folks, like, they're constantly checking on each other and holding each other accountable, because it's our tendency is to know it. We know all of that, we preach all of that, but we're not so great at doing that work ourselves. So,
Yep.
it's real
I
that's
agree.
really, really good advice. So, um I said that was gonna be my takeaway here, but what do you want then for some of the folks that are joining us today and later this episode? People come back to these episodes all the time and share them with friends. Hint, hint. But what do you want folks to take away from our convo today?
That yeah, I think for me the big point is crisis intervention and response is not just responding. It's the before, the during, and then the after, that we really need to be thinking about, and that there's so much upfront work we can do to make our responses effective, efficient, with the ultimate goal of serving our community, but also I would say building those connections too within our schools, whether it's with students, families, staff, and remembering it's a multidisciplinary approach. We're it's an all hands on deck thing,
Mhm.
and we're all supporting and doing what we need to do to keep schools safe, so everyone can thrive in a school. And so I guess I have a lot of takeaways, so I'm going to keep it like right
Right,
at
you're
that.
gonna stop
Not
there.
right there. Yeah.
We would love to hear from all of you listening today, your takeaways from today's conversation. So feel free to reach out to us at Safe and Sound Schools. You'll see our little info at Safe and Sound Schools email there that you can reach out and just share with us. We'd love to hear from you. And as I said, love for all of you to share this podcast with your colleagues. I know I learned a lot myself, and I hope that each and every one of you leaves these episodes and these conversations with something in your cup. I know I'm leaving with quite a few. So I just want to thank you, Ben. That is just a fantastic note, I think, to end the conversation on. It takes all of us, and I think all of us, taking care of each other so that we truly can keep our schools safe and sound. So that has been Ben Fernandez with us here on the Sound Off. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.